Back in 1971, a novel was released and it took the entire country by storm. And it has been adapted into a movie and it has been terrifying people for decades. Let's talk about it. What am I talking about? The Exorcist. As I said, the novel was released in 1971 by William Peter Blatty, and the confines of the novel absolutely terrified readers all across the nation. With the success of the book, a movie was drafted. Having written the book, he also wrote the screenplay. He was a writer for the movie. Where did all this begin? Where did the idea originate from? Was it true? Was it false? Who was involved? That's what we're going to get into. So on this quaint cottage-filled road in Maryland, this is the house that it began at. And no, it wasn't a girl. It was a young boy. And in this house, activity began, which not only terrified the family, but sent them in search for help. And that search would lead them a long ways away from home, which that's their home right here. This is the OG right here in Maryland. So what happened? Let's get into it. In January of 1949, strange going-on started happening in this house to a young boy named Ronald. Not only was it happening to him, but it was being witnessed by his mother Odell and his father Edwin. You could hear scratching inside the walls, dripping noises. Blasts of air would hit you at different points throughout the house, and one thing led to another, and marks and words started to appear on the boy's skin, such as branding. And this absolutely terrified the family. Being Lutherans themselves, they went to their parish priest and asked him for help. With this being in the 40s, the spiritualist movement, as well as the parapsychology movement, was in full swing. So while he was visiting the house, he witnessed a lot of the things that the family was claiming. And this perplexed him. So to delineate whether the activity was happening to the boy or to the house, he set up an evening where Ronald would come with him back to his house. So this is where the occurrence happened that we read about, where Ronald was on a pallet on the floor and it slid by itself under the bed. And Schultz was at his desk watching this and was like, what's going on? This blew his mind, so he got a hold of J.B. Rhine, who was a professor at Duke University who studied parapsychology. They came out to the house and witnessed a lot of the activity that the family originally claimed. Other than J.B. Rhine saying that this was possibly a really advanced poltergeist case, there wasn't a whole lot he could do. With that, Schultz also told the mother, it's like, yeah, we think something a little different is going on here. You need to get a hold of the Catholic Church. They deal with this kind of thing. So this is where Father Hughes comes into this story. Once again, he witnessed everything that the family was talking about and was able to verify some of the activity along with J.B. Rhine and Schultz, the Lutheran minister. Now there's some conjecture of whether there was an exorcism that was performed at Georgetown University Hospital with this guy, the infamous, where the young boy, being in a demonized state, reached up under the mattress and pulled out a spring and slashed Father Hughes. But if we look back into the records, that never happened. Though extraordinary activity was witnessed by him, there is no evidence that he performed any rogue exorcism at the Georgetown University Hospital. Plus, there was an influenza outbreak of that year, so there was a lot of occupancy of young boys around Ronald's age from his school and other places that was there during that time. And they do remember seeing Ronald there. So with all this crazy stuff going down, his mom and dad are like, yo, we need maybe if we take him out of this, environment, maybe he'll get better. So they hopped on a train and went from Washington to St. Louis. So the mother and the son ended up staying with some family in the Belnor neighborhood of St. Louis on Roanoke in this house here. While here, his family members, his aunt and his uncle and his cousins saw some crazy stuff this kid was doing. At one point, he was sitting Indian style and being pushed by unseen forces and sliding around the house, unabated. Well, his cousin was going to St. Louis University, which is a Jesuit-run facility. So with her seeing all this crazy stuff, she went to Father Bishop here and was kind of telling him what was going on. Oh yeah, my cousin's going into trances. Marks are appearing all over his body, spelling out words. Stuff's moving all over the place. The bed's shaking and bouncing off the floor, which was also happening in Washington. And Bishop here was like, by golly, we're going to go check it out. And he grabbed his buddy, a real good buddy, which is his buddy Bowden, William S. Bowden, who was a Jesuit. So they went out there one night to check and see what was going on, and during their visit, the young boy here was manifesting. While there, they witnessed a lot of different things, like the bed bouncing, scratches on the boy, deep guttural voices emanating from this adolescent. So they took their findings and went to the archbishop. Archbishop Joseph E. Ritter gave them the go-ahead to perform an exorcism, but because with the times he wanted everything hush, and the only person that they could report to was the archbishop. So on March 16th, 1949, the exorcisms began. They started in this house. Father Kinney and Father O'Hara from Marquette University were also present during some of the exorcisms that took place here. And they also witnessed some of the crazy stuff that was going down. The bed shaking, the growling, words being spelled out on him, symbols that would appear and then disappear. And during the exorcisms that happened here, he got so violent that they had to move the venue for the exorcisms. So they went to the St. Francis Xavier Church. But while he was here, he got so violent, it was too dangerous to have it happen here, so they had to move him again. He was moved to the Alexian Brothers Hospital, and he stayed here on the 5th floor for pretty much the remainder of his exorcisms. Right about here, because that floor was being unused. So halfway through the series of exorcisms that were happening here, the family, along with Father Bowden, took a trip back to Maryland to see if they could facilitate somewhere for these exorcisms to be held closer to his home. They were unsuccessful in that, so they had to travel back from Maryland to St. Louis. And the Alexian brothers, great group of individuals, decided, hey, you can bring him back here. We have no issues with that. And the brothers took young Ronald like family. I mean, they played cards with him and stuff when he was in lucid states. They would have little outings like to the White House, which is a Jesuit retreat, which is along the Mississippi River. And while there, Ronnie tried to jump off some fucking cliffs and kill himself. And Father Halloran, which was an assistant during this time, decided, hey, it might be best we take him back to the Alexian Brothers Hospital, which they did. And it was there over the course of the next few weeks that the remainder of the exorcisms were carried out, with the final exorcism happening on Easter of 1949 in April. I may have to do another video talking about the kind of experiences that were happening during the exorcisms and during the rituals, but I want to kind of get into something. So that might be a subject for a second video. But after the boy was liberated and he went back to Washington, D.C. with his family, they returned back to this house, which the family lived in for another decade. Ron finished high school and then eventually went to college. He later went on to college and became a freaking rocket scientist working for NASA at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. He holds patents as well, especially those for the tiles and the materials that they use for the tiles for the spacecraft to handle the extreme heat upon re-entry into the atmosphere. Dude was a rocket scientist. He was smart. He got married. He was married for a few years. Then him and his wife Patricia divorced. And supposedly there was a son out of that relationship named Michael. And during his career, he moved around the area owning different properties and different houses. And he eventually retired in the early 2000s. This is the home that he resided in during his retirement and just before his death in May of 2020. Unfortunately, in 2019 and 2020 is when I really got invested into this case and really started searching everything out, including all the events of his life. So when I stumbled upon a notice of death for this gentleman, I was hurt. But then again, other people knew who he was and knew the significance of who he was. But whenever somebody would ask him about, hey, you're the Exorcist kid, do you remember anything? What happened? He would always say, man, I don't remember. I remember spending time with the Alexian brothers. I remember being with my family in St. Louis, but that's all I remember. Which I guess is kind of a blessing considering what he went through. But what we know is he never gave interviews, he never made statements, and he never publicly came out and said anything about it, keeping his privacy private. But this is the Exorcist kid. This is Ron right here. That's the Exorcist kid. That's him in Myrtle Beach just a few months before he passed.